As it says there, my name's Trevor Jay. I'm from Risk Decisions. We're a UK-based company, but we have got, we're based out of Oxford, which is where most of our developments are, but we have also got delivery and support teams right out in Australia and in Canada as well. So we're supporting the worldwide projects. We actually are, as it says at the bottom there, we're not just software developers, we're risk experts, and we're developing the software to deliver the sort of risk management, risk analysis that mega projects across the world need. Looking at it here, Predict is our software. The clue's a little bit in the name there, in that we're aiming to help you predict how your projects and programs are going to deliver. And it's modern software. We've rewritten it over the last few years, but it's also extremely scalable in the terms we'll be running from, I've got some customers who've literally got a single user to customers with thousands of users actually spread across multiple countries. But one of the keys with all project controls tools is integration. So we make sure that our risk management software is integrated not only with itself, in terms of being able to analyse as well as manage risks, but also with other tools such as scheduling tools, but also exporting information via two-way APIs so that it can be used within business intelligence, Microsoft Power BI, for example. Some of the people that we tend to work with are not enough EPC people, organisations, which is why I'm here, okay? We're dealing with large aerospace and defence organisations who've got definite mega projects. Building aircraft carriers and things like that is not a small undertaking. But I've also got lots of infrastructure, construction, energy organisations as well. And as I said, some of those will be managing risks from billion-pound projects down to a few million pounds as well. Now, the title of my talk is about, are you taking enough risk, or how do you know if you're taking the right amount of risk? So there's a bit of background to that. Got a little slide here about some of the challenges that projects have come. This one's come from a McKinsey paper. We're looking here at a number of different projects from different industries, and let's just point out a couple of the things. Of all of these projects, on average, they overran by almost 2 years. On average, they were 80% over budget. That's almost double, okay? And then at extremes, how on earth can you let a project overrun by 9 years or 590%? I mean, how come somebody didn't try and stop these things? But there are some good ones. And surprisingly, these are the ones that we've worked with. So, the 2012 Olympic Village in London, I'll be talking about this in a little bit. But essentially, they had to deliver on time. Yeah? You can't have the athletes waiting to get into their rooms once the Olympic has started. So they were actually looking at their schedule and making sure that they were 100% sure that they would deliver 2 months before they were actually contracted to. This is an interesting one. Babcock Infrastructure changed the way they managed their contingency budgets. And when I get into an example of this, I'll sort of explain exactly what they did. But essentially, they gained 2% margin on their projects by changing the way that they managed the risk contingency that they gave to their project managers. Right, what sort of things do we need to look at when managing risk? The first one is our uncertainty. So this is a general potential variation in an activity's cost or duration. And my favourite analogy is the drive to work. Yeah? When I drive to work, it takes somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, dependent upon the number of red traffic lights, how busy the roads are, etc. But there's also risk. A risk event has a probability of happening, and if it occurs, there will be a potential impact on time and cost. So in my driving to work analogy, that's a puncture. And perhaps if I get a puncture, it's going to take me an extra half an hour to get to work. Now, you have to be very careful when considering these things that you don't say, all right, how long does it take you to get to work? Well, from what I've said, it could be anywhere between 30 and 70 minutes, but that's not the range that I would want to be giving to people, yeah? Because that 70 minutes is only if a puncture occurs. So I have to say it's 30 to 40 minutes, but every now and again it might take longer. So I get a completely different view when we take that into account. And those are the sorts of things that I want to be looking at when we try and work out whether we're taking the right amount of risk. And the way we're going to do that is actually by having a look at some of our Predict software. And so we'll be looking into Predict Risk Controller, which is a database, not an Excel spreadsheet, please, for your risk registers. All right. How on earth do you audit an Excel spreadsheet to see who's changed what and when? And with linked to that, and actually we'll be spending most of our time in Predict Risk Analyzer, which is a Monte Carlo analysis tool. All right. And that's what's going to be helping us determine whether or not we're taking the right amount of risk. So, let's go and have a look. So, here we are. This is going to be fun, trying to have a microphone and a mouse at the same time. So, I'm looking at a simple project to start with. And this is the little dashboard here for our project manager. So you can see how, in my case, it's all red. Okay, so everything's overdue. And one of our customers would say to her project managers before the scheduled project review, if there's too much red on that dashboard there, we're not going to do the review because it's not worth it, because the data is not up to date enough for us to be able to make any accurate decisions. So what does that project involve? Okay, well, I'm assuming you can see the same screen as me, actually. I can't really tell from here. There you go, it is the same one. So what I've got is my fairly standard looking risk register. But one of the things I try and emphasise with people about risk management is it's not the risks that are that important. It's the actions down here that we're going to perform that help us manage the risks. These are the things that are going to mitigate the probability or the impact of those risks. Or, every now and again, actually exploit an opportunity. How many people here, when thinking about risk management, think about opportunities? Come on, let's be interactive. One, oh, no, a few more than that. But not very many, really, is it? Yeah. Which actually matches what I tend to see most of the time. But we do build and manage opportunity. Think of the positives at times. So as I said, these actions are important, and we can see over here that I'm actually looking at budgets for actions. Yeah? How much are these actions going to cost me? Yeah? And I'm thinking, right, yeah, if I'm sitting here with a score of 12, I need to get down to a 6. All right, otherwise my exposure is too high, too much risk being taken. And I've got a nice action here that's getting me down to a 6. Next one down, I want to get down to a 4. My actions, though, are getting me to a 9 and to a 6. I'm not there yet. Okay? But I am being reasonably good. I'm actually putting in here a fallback action. I'm actually thinking, what might I do if this risk occurs? So my mitigation actions are trying to either reduce the probability, reduce the impact, but sometimes the risk could occur, so we need to think in advance rather than panicking when it happens. Okay? So what we can now do though, as I said, this is linking our risk registers in Predict Risk Controller to Analyzer, is to say, okay, let's analyse. Sure, there's a film called that once. There we go, let's have a look. It is brave, isn't it, being live in front of so many people. All right, there we go. So what have I got here? So I've looked at my cost impacts. Now, I suppose I better ask the question, how many people know what Monte Carlo analysis is? We've got a number, but not that many. So what Monte Carlo analysis is doing is it's looking at the risks that I've identified. Now these risks have got a probability of occurring, and if they do occur, there's a potential, in this case I'm looking at a cost impact. All right? Now, that cost impact has a range. So just like my journey to work, 40 to 60 minutes, saying if this risk occurs, it might cost us somewhere between 1 million, 1.5 million. Now I've got a number of different risks there. So what Monte Carlo analysis will do is it will perform thousands of potentially scenarios running through my project. And it will say, okay, did this risk occur? Yes, it did. All right, let's take a cost impact. Did this one occur? No. And for all of the risks, each time, each iteration, it will add up what the total cost impact is. Doing that thousands of times gives me a distribution of potential impacts over here, which enables me to say, oh, given those risks that you've identified and their probabilities, I am 90% confident that these risks will cost me less than 2.5 million. Okay? Now, this is what Babcock Infrastructure started to do. Previously they had said to their project manager, right, your project is worth X million pounds, we will give you 5% as a contingency to cover risks. And surprisingly, none of that 5% was ever given back. The project managers essentially took that as 5% extra budget. When they started to do risk analysis like this, they said, all right, you've identified these risks. What we will do is we will give you 50% of that as a potential contingency if those risks occur, or some of those risks occur. Now we know, 50% sounds great, but half the time it's going to cost you more than that. So what they said is, well, if specific risks occur, then we'll be actually having up to 80% as a management reserve, and you can come and ask us for it. And surprisingly, they didn't tend to come and ask for it. And as I mentioned at the start, what that actually resulted in was that they could measure that their projects were making 2% more margin, basically because they were giving that contingency away effectively as extra budget. Now, other things we can look at, remember we talked about the cost of those actions. Well, if I nip over here, we can see the difference between my current assessment of those risks with the target assessment, i.e. if all of my actions have worked and got me to my target position, I will actually be over 2 million better off. But it's also showing me over here that if I mitigate this risk, the groundworks problem risk, my target position will be 1 million better off. Also says that you've actually got a cost-benefit equation here. So what I've done is I've taken my target position away from my current position and divided by the cost of those actions. Yeah? And it's giving me a cost-benefit ratio, in this case about 15:1. So it's worth looking at some of these down here to say, well, this one, for example, isn't saving me very much. This one might save me more, but it's got a better return on investment. So you can work out which actions is better to perform. So this is just looking at risks though. I mentioned uncertainty beforehand. So if we have a look at a slightly different scenario now, and make that full screen, what I've included in here, as you can see, is a line for base cost uncertainty that if I removed it would take 62.5 million away from my overall cost. Now that's because this is made up of my standard estimate, and if we look at our cost estimate here, we can see that I've got the individual items that my estimators have come up with. Now this is actually based on works one of my colleagues did with a client who had to make sure that they could deliver within the budget that they'd been given them by their customer. And you can see how they've come up with the estimates. Now, I don't know about others, but it seems a bit strange to me that an estimate, such as this one down here, says the temporary works we estimate will cost us £1,334,937. That's a pretty accurate estimate from my point of view, but there you go. So when we were doing work with the customer, they said, well, these are the base values, but actually we believe there's some uncertainty about these. So for example, this particular one here, the general plant, we think there's a medium level of uncertainty. And what we mean by that, and again, we can play with as many of these as we wanted to, actually, we'll take the value that the estimators have given us, and for a medium uncertainty, we'll drop it by 5% at the most, but it could well be 8% more. All right? And that's now allowing us to create this little dashboard here, and in fact, we can have a look at just that base cost. This is our estimate. All right? And if we're putting this together as a bid, remember, we want to make sure that we're confident enough we can be delivered for below this cost. Now, let's just have a quick think here. If we go back to my cost estimate, the estimator said it's just 61.4 million. But if I look at my dashboard, at the moment I'm at 63 million. So if we move along to oh my goodness, just a minute, 61.4 million. Have I got that? Have I got? Oh, there we go. Blimey. We're only 14% confident that our costs will be less than 61.4 million. I'm not quite sure. I think that's me taking too much risk if I go at that level. So, we've looked at ways of understanding if we're taking the right amount of risk from a cost perspective. We've brought in the uncertainty that we've got here, and as we can move back to something more realistic and perhaps bring in those risks again. So here I'm looking at those risks and the uncertainty. Okay, so now it's up to me to use this information, okay, to decide whether or not I'm happy to say, well, yeah, we will bid at 65 million. I do know that there's a 13% chance that it will cost us more than 65 million, but if I go any higher than 65 million, I know I'm not going to win the business. Right? But I'm actually using that sort of information now to decide whether or not I'm taking the right amount of risk. Now, Mark this morning talked about being given an impossible schedule to deliver. Well, let's have a quick look at schedule as well. So, if we go back over here, I've got a tiny little schedule, and again, I've got some risks associated with this schedule. But the way we do that is we can actually say, here's the activities, and this activity here, if the planning approval delayed risk occurs, it's going to add time and potentially cost to the planning approval delayed activity. And I've got a number of different risks attached to different activities. So we can analyse this, and click on the button to show the screen. And if we're lucky, oh, I got this one. Interesting little thing here, we actually check that schedule. So you might have things like constraints. Oh, this activity must start on that date. Well, that's actually stopping me do a proper analysis of what might be able to happen. So we can actually ignore those, but we'll tell you about them. Let's make that one full screen. Now, here we are looking at in blue, the schedule, and just looking at the uncertainty into the duration of activities. And it's telling me that my delivery date from the deterministic schedule is the 10th of January. Now, I was perhaps better off than Mark was, because it's telling me here I've got a 50% chance of making that one. If I want to give somebody a date that we're 90% confident in meeting, then it needs to be the 15th of March. Now, this is the stuff that the Athletes Village were doing all the time. They kept on making sure that their dates they were 100% confident in. And they did this every week. And if they weren't, they would look at which risks were driving that. In this case, I've got activities there, but I can say what risks, remember we had those 3 risks, what risks are driving that end date? What can we do about those to bring us back, to make sure that we're 100% confident that we're going to deliver on time? And the sort of thing they could try, let's just move that back down to a 90% or wherever, is they could actually go in and they could say, right, wrong one, we want to have a look at those risks. That groundworks problem one there is, we're saying, is going to add 40, 50, 60 days. Now, I know we can't get rid of it, but if we could come up with an action that let us say that it was 20... let's go, I can't type very well with this in my hand. 30, no, I'll do 40 days, and go back to our dashboard. There we go. Yeah, I'm a little bit better off, 58% confident I'm going to make that date. But I've also come in almost a month now in terms of my 90% confidence date. So this is helping me not only determine whether I've got the right amount of risk, but which things I can do, how I can help make sure that the amount of risk I'm taking is going to deliver in the manner I need it to deliver. And by the way, I did say this was cost and time. Here we're looking at time impacts. We could also look at cost impacts. This is an interesting little one here. The blue distribution is looking at how the cost varies based on purely the uncertainty of the activity's duration, because the longer an activity takes, the more it costs. But the red distribution is seeing here how the risks extending the duration of the activities has increased the cost. But over here, risks have actually added direct cost to some of these activities as well. So that's why I've got the extra lump of cost being added on here. So hopefully I've shown you a number of different ways that we can work out whether or not we're taking the right amount of risk. And if we nip back into here again, then we can just do a quick summary of like, what do you need to give you confidence in your cost and your schedule? Well, you've got to get that risk-based information sitting there to make sure that your management can make decisions on up-to-date relevant information. We need to look at our target position. Now, remember we had the cost of those actions in there? The moment you've approved those actions and said, we want to be at our target position, that action cost and those action activities need to be in your baseline schedule. Didn't have time to talk really about tombstone risks here, but those are great ones where you've got a very low probability, but they could potentially have a huge impact. Right? These are the sorts of things that you want to be trying to talk with your partners about, with your customers or contractors, as to who's best to own those particular risks. Understanding what your tolerance is, are we happy to be 80% confident that we'll deliver on time, or do we need to be like Athletes Village, 100% confident we're going to be delivering on time? If we're talking to customers about this, how mature are they in terms of who wants to own a risk? Do they understand that even if they've passed the risk on to you, it's still them that's going to be affected? Yeah? I think we had earlier, if you're not being able to produce power from your factory, from your power station on time, it's you that's losing the money. And by having done this and having the data to back it up, you're in a much stronger position to actually negotiate with your clients in terms of who should be owning the risk. So there you go. Any questions? Yeah. Yes, go. I don't know if everyone could hear that, but asking, does the tool allow for correlations between risks? And what we're meaning by that, I think, is if this risk occurs, then another risk is more likely, or conversely less likely to occur as well. And yes, the tool will take correlation into account. You can build that in, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
I have two questions. One is more or less correlated to this one. You talked about base cost uncertainty. Managing the base cost uncertainty. Isn't it, if I manage risk by risk, I'm in any case managing the base cost of uncertainty.
So you're saying, right, managing your risks. Well, if you remember compared to the base cost uncertainty, that's why I tried to really emphasize the difference between uncertainty and risk. Uncertainty is a general variation in perhaps how long something might take, whereas a risk is, but if this happens, then it's going to take a much longer. So my estimate uncertainty is it's going to dig the foundations or something, yeah? That's uncertainty. I can't really manage that, all right? What I can manage is, but if we need to dig 10 metres deeper, then it's going to take us another 50,000 tonnes of concrete. That's the risk I can begin to manage. So that's the difference between the two. But I want to be able to model the combined effects of uncertainty and the risk impact as well. Does that answer the question?
Okay,
thanks.
And the other question I have is about the Babcock you mentioned. I did not get that much what they did more.
Oh, the Babcock example, yeah. So that's the one where originally what they were doing was just saying to a project manager, the budget for this project is 10 million, but we'll give you 5% contingency to cover any risks. Yeah? So effectively, the project manager said, well, in which case my budget is actually 10 million plus 5%. And who's quicker at doing maths than me? That's how much they effectively spent. Whereas when they started using Predict, they would say, okay, the budget is 10 million, but from a risk point of view, we've analysed the risks and we've come up with the fact that they could potentially be 500,000. We'll give you 50% of that, i.e. 250,000, but you can come and ask for more if specific risks that you've identified have occurred, and you can ask for more from our management reserve. Right? What tended to happen was sort of it's sort of almost human nature. Previously they were given the budget, effectively they thought they'd been given the budget, so they spent it. When they had to go and ask for more money, they didn't do it. All All right, so they gained from that point of view. And another one actually was because their risks that they'd identified were on a system that management could see, visibility from a management point of view actually had a lot to do with it as well.
Thank you.
Okay, well, there we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor.